Hello and welcome to another edition of Another Book Review. This week I'll be reviewing Bottle Grove by Daniel Handler. Go into the author's background, talk briefly about the plot without giving any spoilers away, talk about what I liked about the book, what I didn't like about the book, who I'd recommend the book to, and finish off with what I'll be reading for next time. Daniel Handler is an author best known for the Lemony Snicket series of books, which he writes under a pen name. He also writes adult novels under his real name. This is one of those novels. He also played accordion and other instruments for the band Magnetic Fields. Most famously on the record 69 Love Songs, he plays the accordion. I'd never read any of his other stuff. This book, Bottle Grove, is a story of two couples who live in San Francisco. The title Bottle Grove refers both to a kind of public space where weddings and other events are held, and there's also the name of a bar in the book called Bottle Grove, where one of the main characters, Martin, owns the bar. He caters this wedding as a bartender, and he meets a mysterious woman named Patchett. They become involved. They're meeting at the wedding of two other characters, Ben and Rachel, I believe is the other character's name. And Martin and Patchett basically scheme together to nefarious means. There's a couple schemes that they have going on that involve some other characters, one of whom is a tech billionaire who's called the Vic. So without giving any spoilers away, that's kind of the main book. It kind of follows both of these couples. I will say it follows the Martin Patchett couple a little bit more closely than the Rachel Ben couple, but they're both in there. Some of the things that I liked about the book, I think the character Martin, while his schemes really weren't the most thought out, so to speak, he at least had some kind of motivations, and I understood what he was trying to do. He's kind of running this kind of rundown bar that has no real aspirations to become anything bigger, and he's trying to find a way out of that. I thought that was interesting. I think that some of the schemes were interesting as far as what they would have done to the dynamics of the book, even though, again, I don't think that some of them were the most thought out from a character perspective as far as the odds of them succeeding. I think that there's some detail in the work in the book that I thought was really interesting. At one point, Handler describes the music that's playing by kind of describing the record cover that the album comes from, and I think describes a Joni Mitchell record, but it does give you a sense of what this bar is like. I thought that was kind of an interesting way to do that. I think the book is relatively short. The book's only about 225 pages, and I definitely feel like this is a book that by lesser authors could have been dragged on and on. It's a pretty brisk 225 pages. You read through it pretty quickly. That sounds a little bit like a backhanded compliment, but I mean that in the best way. It wasn't something that was... The idea was there, it's completed, and it wasn't like drawn out. I think the ending of the book, and I'll get a little bit into the discussion of the things I didn't like as much, so this maybe make a little bit more sense then, but I think the ending of the book gives you enough to kind of piece together the story and kind of solve some of the major mysteries, solve is in quotes, but gives you enough to kind of draw your own interpretations of what happened. I thought it in an interesting way. Things that I didn't like about the book. I think this book, if you've ever seen David Lynch movies such as Mulholland Drive or Lost Highway or Blue Velvet, you'll notice that David Lynch has a lot of, call them tics, call them tropes, call them fingerprints, call them whatever you want, but usually characters have obsessions, typically with sex. There's obsessions over kind of the dark nature within. There is a mysterious character who may or may not be a figment of the imagination, who may or may not be supernatural. There's the dialogue between characters that sounds more like kind of the vomited thoughts of your subconscious than any kind of real things that two people would say to one another. There's kind of a timeless nature to things. The characters don't really have a sense of forward momentum in some ways, just due to kind of navel gazing or egocentrism. It feels like they're the only characters in the universe. If all those things seem appealing to you, you may like this book a little bit more than I did. And that's really no real knock on Daniel Handler. I think it's really the closest thing I've ever read to something that was Lynchian as far as taking those tropes and putting them into a book. I just bounced off it really hard. I didn't really care for it. And I think that I've never really been a huge David Lynch fan. I know he has his fans out there. I'm just not really one of them. But I would say even seeing that and knowing that, I would like to think that I'm objective enough to say, what an executed version, a well-executed version of that looks like. And I don't think this is quite it. I think even with those problems in it that are kind of parts that I'm not a huge fan of, I think there are things in this novel that are poorly done. I think that the characters who at first glance should be really intelligent do really foolish things for no real good reason. I think kind of the schemes, so to speak, that I kind of mentioned before, if you put any kind of real thought into them, you can kind of see why they would be bad ideas really quickly. The writing is just bad. There's just some bad lines. The mysteries that are there that are kind of explained as the book goes along aren't as powerful as you would maybe hope them to be. I think he does do a good job of kind of tying in the theme of, if you're looking for a book that kind of talks about what it means to be a woman and married in the 21st century, of what that means, I think there's some stuff in here that to get out of for that. I think there are other books that maybe have done that better. I think if that's what you're looking for, Fate and Furies by Lauren Groff is probably going to be better, but I think that definitely is in this book. I think that there are characters who have no real forward motion. They're kind of secondary characters who may be more interesting if he had given them more to do, but they act like little more than sidekicks in this, and I had a hard time with that. So yeah, I didn't really care for it. I think, like I said, there are some things to recommend it for, and if you're one of those people who is a big David Lynch fan and you'd want to see, well, what would this look like as a novel, I actually think this may be something to check out. I don't think the execution's quite there. I think that for all the reasons I've kind of stated. I was going to make one more point, and now I have lost that point. So that's pretty much Bottle Grove. I think it was kind of an interesting experiment in some ways. I don't think it quite works. Obsession with jazz, that may have been my other point. Characters in the book, even though they're in their mid to late 20s, have a strange obsession with jazz that doesn't really kind of exist in current America. When does the book take place? There's a character in the book who is a tech genius, and his ideas that have made him money are kind of really briefly touched upon, but it's not quite clear if this book is happening in the late 90s or the current age. And so there's the question then of what else is going on beyond the world of this book that doesn't really get touched on. So that is the book. So that is Bottle Grove. If anybody has read Bottle Grove, I definitely would want to hear your thoughts if maybe I missed something. But that's it. A lot of plot holes. Kind of like a David. Again, I think if you were who I'd recommend the book to, if you're someone who likes really kind of dark Lynchian movies and you're not really so much concerned about whether or not the plot would happen in the quote unquote real world, but you're more interested in the characters as almost allegory of emotions and kind of how people deal with emotions, this may ring more true to you than it did to me. Though that's pretty much the people I would recommend that book to. It's definitely a very adult book, so I would not recommend it to maybe teenagers or people younger than that. But that's Bottle Grove, and next time I'm going to be reading Good Economics for Hard Times. Until next time, please feel free to like the video if you enjoyed this, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Again, if you have read Bottle Grove, I haven't read too many reviews of it. I'm actually kind of curious. I haven't read any reviews of it, so I'm kind of curious to what other people said about it. But please feel free to leave a comment section in the comment section below. Until next time, bye.